Would you like us to take questions?
No, we'll wait.
Okay. Let Aaron move briskly through our DMV reports.
Good morning, committee members. I have a lot of reports to go through, so bear with me a little bit. We'll be starting with the mobile driver's license study that was directed in last year's DMV agency bill. The General Assembly asked the DMV to consider what the impacts of implementing mobile IDs would mean for the way that they currently do business and whether they could utilize a third-party vendor to do a lot of that work for them. And then the General Assembly also asked them to come up with a timeline for implementing mobile driver's licenses for North Carolinians. For this study, they primarily reviewed best practices from the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, AMVA, which I would consider more like the NCSL of DMVs across the country. You're going to hear a lot from them as we kind of go along, so just kind of remember that in your head. DMV also reached out to other states and third-party vendors that had experience in implementing mobile driver's licenses to kind of understand what lessons North Carolina could learn from them. And then finally, the North Carolina DMV surveyed about 90 local law enforcement agencies to kind of understand what their concerns would be going forward and what kind of training they would need for understanding how to interact with mobile IDs. First, what actually is a mobile driver's license? These are typically a mobile application on your phone that provides the same amount of information as your physical driver's license. Typically, you would use them in the same way you would your ID if you need your identity verified, or maybe you're buying something that has an age restriction. It would typically act the same way your physical card would. In considering what kind of impact implementing mobile IDs would have on the business practices at DMV, there are a few things that the General Assembly would have to really set forth about what their expectations are. The first being whether they would be a full replacement for a physical ID. This really matters for when you're buying an age-restricted product, possibly if you are participating in, say, something like gambling, or even when you need to go get your ID verified or going to vote. If these are intended to be a full replacement for your physical card, there are some legal intricacies that would have to be kind of dealt with in statute. The price of usage is fairly important. If these are intended to be something that is a free add-on service that anyone can access, that has different implications for how the DMV could kind of make that money back for implementing mobile IDs. There's a couple of state examples that this report actually presented. We have Arizona, which offers mobile IDs as a free add-on service, and DMV just kind of has to eat the cost of offering those IDs to individuals. And you also have a state like Louisiana, which actually has a third-party management company that handles mobile IDs. They collect a fee for being able to access it, and they kind of just eat the cost on their end for what fee they're actually charging. Another thing to consider is the method of provisioning, which is just a fancy word for saying how you sign up for one of these. If it's something that can be done online, that would require a little bit of IT work for DMV to kind of figure out. If it would be something that you'd have to go in person to, say, get permission to access a mobile ID, that would have some real logistical considerations that would have to be thought of for the way DMV does business. And finally, just digital wallet integration. If this is something you could just add on to, say, an Apple or a Google wallet, that could actually be easier for implementation. If this is something where you have to rely strictly on, say, a DMV developed app, that would obviously be something that the state would have to consider as far as cost and the trickiness of implementing that. For third-party vendors, DMV said up front that it would require a third-party vendor to implement these types of IDs, especially if the state would like to get this done as quickly as possible. it would be pretty imperative to rely on a vendor that has experience in developing these types of apps in other states. It would help kind of speed up development. It would help with state-by-state recognition issues that may be presented. But there are some considerations that would have to be thought of at the General Assembly level and at the DMV contracting level. Most of that is data and security concerns. If your personal ID is going to be given out to a third-party vendor, what kind of security and additional locking mechanisms would DMV have to offer and kind of ensure are in a contract. There's also the long-term IT support. If this is something that a vendor comes in, builds for DMV, and leaves, that might be something that DMV will have to have additional staffing and IT support to implement. If this is something that a long-term vendor would just do for us, that would obviously come with some recurring costs, but it would be more on the contracting side than it would on individual staffing. And then, of course, just the overall cost and stability. This is something that we don't entirely know at the moment. What would it cost to completely offer mobile IDs until a proper RFP and RFI is done with some third-party vendors? But this is definitely something to consider with DMV going forward. So some preliminary costs for actually implementing mobile IDs. This is not including the amount of money we'd have to pay to a vendor to actually implement. This is more focused on the things that state agencies would have to worry about. There would obviously be some staffing and IT support if individuals need to, say, ask questions at the DMV call center or maybe get some technical support. There'd have to be some training and some additional staff at DMV to do that type of work. There'd also have to be some outside training of local law enforcement agencies so they understand how to recognize mobile IDs and how to verify them. There'd also have to be some training at the Secretary of State's office and the Board of Elections because those individuals regulate notaries. And then, of course, if you're using a mobile ID for voting, that would have to be something that they would have to train their poll workers to actually understand and how to use. The actual implementation timeline can vary depending on the approach that the state takes. On the top end, we have the normal process, which would be your RFP, going out and finding a new vendor. That would take anywhere from 18 to 24 months. We could actually speed up the process by utilizing the vendor that we already have for the physical driver's licenses that we offer, which is Canadian Banknote. DMV projected that it would only take about 12 to 18 months. So that would definitely be a consideration for the General Assembly to kind of decide whether we would allow DMV to do that or whether it would be something that they would have to go through a full RFP process to do. Impacts of implementing mobile IDs. Obviously, we have private industry and LPAs that are mostly responsible for verifying the information. You also have, obviously, products that you'd have to buy that have an age restriction. If a private business would need some sort of scanner or need some sort of training to recognize what is a legitimate and not a legitimate mobile ID, that is something that the state would kind of have to consider what that impact is going to be and whether there's some training that those private businesses would need. For state agencies, like I said earlier, the Secretary of State's office regulates notaries, and so for them to actually verify that someone is a real individual with these legitimate credentials, there'd have to be some training and some regulatory updates to kind of recognize mobile IDs. As with the Board of Elections, if you're going to just present your phone, that's something that's going, instead of like a physical ID card, that's something that's going to have to be considered. And then local law enforcement. These are the individuals that already interact with your IDs the most, and if you have a mobile ID, this will be extremely important with kind of identifying, can they verify your mobile ID without, say, having to take your phone or having to, actually look at it for an extended period of time. Just kind of understanding what that impact would be very important, and then making sure that we train local law enforcement agencies and how to identify a legitimate ID would be important. We covered a lot of the major recommendations as I kind of went through, just to kind of review. DMV explained that if we integrated the same vendor that we already use for physical credentials, we could implement this a lot faster. We'd also be able to implement a company that already knows how to develop mobile IDs in other states. They would also be able to collaborate with Apple and Google to integrate IDs into digital wallets. That would be extremely important for uptake and for the cost of implementation. It'd be extremely important to adopt some security measures, which DMV provided a lot of great detail in their report about how this could be done to kind of ensure that individuals' data is protected. For a revenue model, DMV recommended that the state focus on offering a free add-on service at the DMV instead of making this something that you would pay for. The rationale there is just that there would be more uptake and it would be a little easier to implement without having to worry about, did someone pay their fee and did they pay it to us or to a third-party vendor, just to make sure that everybody would have access to this. And the last recommendation, which would of course require some most likely some additional appropriation to actually implement, would be a public awareness campaign and some law enforcement training. And we discussed a little bit about what those costs would look like earlier. So that is the first report that I have. Keep going. Next we have the second study that was actually directed in last year's agency bill, which is dealer plate modernization. This study also primarily focused on reviewing best practices from ANVA. It also relied on a survey of other states. But the main issues here was that the General Assembly wanted DMV to study what the issuance process currently is and how we can make improvements to that, and what the design and format of dealer plates actually looks like compared to other states. Now, to start with how dealers actually apply, individuals interested in starting a dealer business, aside from doing your typical Secretary of State paperwork and business creation stuff, they'd have to directly apply to DMV for licensure. They have to complete a training course. They have to do a paper application and mail it in. And they also have to pay a fee commensurate with the type of dealer that they actually are, to which there are a lot of different types of dealers. There's give or take 9 different types in statute. And so that makes the implementation of figuring out what you need a little more complicated. And then after you complete your paperwork, you are given the opportunity to actually buy dealer plates, which are the plates that you would put on the back of the vehicle if you're, say, doing a test drive, maybe doing some deliveries or some other types of business that you do at a dealership. And usually those are based on the number of previous cars you've sold or the size of the vehicles in your lot. And then if you're a new dealership, it's based on the number of sales reps that you have, the people that would actually be using these dealer plates. As far as the design and format, it's a fairly simple design, especially compared to your traditional license plate. North Carolina license plates are made of thick aluminum with raised numbers. It actually shows the type of dealer that you are. So if you look at the top right picture, that's a franchise dealer, and that's indicated on every type of dealer plate. Temporary plates are the other major plate option that you have to consider when you're a dealer. They're made of coated board material, kind of like a cardboard, but a little sturdier. Those kind of give you the space to write information about the vehicle and about the dealer that you purchased it from, and then of course what the expiration date of those plates would be. And those are bought in bulk by a dealer. They don't have to rely on those same metrics for a dealer plate. They just buy based on what they actually need. Some lessons that DMV said that North Carolina could kind of learn from other states really starts with the way we do our application process for dealer plates here in North Carolina. We are still doing paper submission of applications, whereas many states have either moved exclusively to an electronic option or made it as more of an alternative to paper. The North Carolina dealer system has a lot of different types of dealers. Like I said, give or take 9. Some states offer much less. It's 2 types of dealers, and that really makes a difference for the types of fees that you're going to pay. We have a broader range of fees. The example here from Georgia, there's just one flat fee for your application and for your renewal, whereas in North Carolina, depending on the type of dealer, that price really changes. And that also makes a change for the initial plates that you'll buy. Usually plates are a little cheaper as you buy more and more, but that initial plate can be pretty expensive depending on the type of dealer that you are. And then a recent change was actually the renewal schedule. In North Carolina, in the last agency bill, we actually changed the renewal schedule for dealer licensure to a biennial application cycle. Most states that offer the same budget cycle as North Carolina do this. There are some other states that either do the yearly reapplication or renewal, or there are some states like South Carolina for some reason do a triennial renewal system. As far as the design of dealer plates, we have Rhode Island's here. They are pretty much the same as what we offer. They denote information a little differently, but they all kind of have this plain dealer plate design. There are some states that allow logos or contact information of the dealer, but North Carolina just kind of sticks with this pretty basic system, and so do most states. Something that DMV did beyond researching the issuance, design, and format process that was directed in the study was to consider some additional law enforcement concerns for how we can improve the way we utilize dealer plates in North Carolina. Most of these are on the margin changes that North Carolina can implement to ensure fraud and misuse is limited. I'm going to kind of get into most of those. Biggest thing to note here, there have been a lot of changes to the way we do dealer plates in North Carolina. Probably the biggest one is print-on-demand plates, which we'll start to implement pretty soon, if not already. Just something to consider with those is making sure that they have some proper security features, which is something that other North Carolina plates have. So to conclude, for the things that were actually directed in the study, North Carolina has pretty much very similar plate design and format than that other states do. The most significant place that DMV could really improve in would be just the allowance of online submissions that would require a little bit of time and implementation at the DMV to make the IT changes that are necessary for that. Next would be just updating some old language that did not get updated in the last agency bill to kind of reflect the fact that we now do a biennial renewal schedule for dealer plate licensure. And then on the law enforcement side, there was a few recommendations starting with making sure that the future print-on-demand registration system has some security features built in. That will be really important for identifying what's a real versus what's a fake plate, both inside of North Carolina and outside of it. Another recommendation was for the state to consider a mechanism for updating DMV or license and theft on when dealer plates are lost or stolen. Right now, whenever you have to fill out an application, you don't have to provide any information, say like a police report. That is something that DMV recommended would kind of be important going forward, so license and theft can track what happens with that case and whether there's some bigger fraud and abuse things going on. And then the final recommendation from this study was the need for education of surrounding states on North Carolina dealer plate law. This is mostly just a precautionary measure to ensure fraud, waste, and abuse is limited. So if states understand, hey, when I see a North Carolina plate, I know that one's legitimate or I know that one's not legitimate, would help kind of ensure that fraud and abuse is limited. Next, we have the alternative license plate material study. This is the last one that we have that was directed in last year's agency bill. There is some history that kind of leads up to this, starting with 2019, in which the General Assembly mandated the replacement of plates older than 7 years. This was done to kind of remove a lot of the older plates out of the system that were currently there. This led to a lot of folks who had some older plates that needed to go to LPAs to replace them, along with the folks getting their first license plate. So it kind of led to a bit of a bottleneck that in most years would have been able, DMV and would have been able to handle. But the real problem came in the COVID pandemic at the beginning, where there was a lot of supply chain management issues, both across the country and with DMV's license plate manufacturer, Correction Enterprise. This led to DMV needing to suspend some of these older license plate replacements, which I believe just recently changed, but that bottleneck and that supply chain issue became so much of a problem that the General Assembly made sure to direct DMV to kind of study, is there any way that we can avoid this in the future, and what kind of alternative plate materials can we utilize to make sure that this doesn't happen again? So to begin, the current plate design is a 12 by 15 plate, or 12 by 5 plate, sorry. They're about 27 thousandths inch thick aluminum with raised letters and kind of beveled for rigidity. Main thing is these are kind of thicker, more rigid plates that allow them to last a long time. They're chemically treated to ensure that they can hold up to the elements, and they have a long shelf life. When considering what would be an alternative to this, DMV first looked at digital plates. These are kind of a recent addition to the different types of license plates that are offered around the country. Trying to find my notes. I would consider these almost like an iPad that sits on the back of your car. They kind of present a lot of the same information that you would have from a license plate just on a little screen. They also allow for some vehicle tracking in case your car gets stolen, or some alerts that are kind of built in. The biggest issue with these is just the fact that there's only one manufacturer that currently offers these. So they come with a very high price tag and often with a subscription cost, which makes them more of a premium product for some customers and less of an alternative for customers, or for most individuals. Plastic plates, which are the complete opposite of these digital plates, they're already used by many people for vanity plates, and some states will use them for some official front plates. They're offered in a variety of like different sizes and design options, and they can be made very cheap. The biggest issue with these, and with a lot of the options that we have, is they're just nowhere near as durable as our current option for plates. They have a tendency to curl and yellow with time, which is not something that our current plate design actually has a problem with. We also have adhesive-backed plate wrap. I kind of think of these as just a thick sticker that sits on the front of your vehicle. They really don't go in the place of your traditional license plate that most cars have. They kind of stick to your front or back bumper. The main issue that DMV identified with these is that they still have a durability issue. Like I said, they're essentially a sticker, so they're very easy to ruin, and they don't hold up to the elements very well. And then, of course, if we were to start to implement these, there'd have to be some statutory changes to allow these to be used in the place of our traditional license plate. The last alternative material that DMV studied were thin and flat aluminum plates. So taking what we already offer, getting rid of the raised numbers, and getting rid of some of the rigidity and security things that we already have on there, you would essentially be able to make these in pretty much the same way at a cheaper price. The biggest concern with these is they have a lower durability. They don't last as long as our thicker plates do. They were also experimented with a few years ago, and they were not as popular with both the public and law enforcement in actually identifying these. They actually had a tendency to scrap them more often in the manufacturing process too, so they were kind of seen as a not really available option quite yet. So the conclusions from this study, the state, or DMV, really presented the need to continue the use of our thick aluminum plate design that we have, mostly because of durability concerns that we'd have with all the other plate options that we offered earlier. There's also a little bit of a cost concern. While a lot of these plate options might be cheaper to do now, they would actually be a little more expensive in the short term because you'd have to get correction enterprises in DMV to kind of update their manufacturing process. We could use alternative plates as something to consider in the future if we ever face another shortage again, like we did in 2020 and 2019. But it's worth noting that no other state had this shortage problem. North Carolina was pretty much the only state in the country that faced this issue. And most of this really bogs down to some supply chain management and maybe some better practices of actually monitoring what our supplies look like. And that's something that both correction enterprises and DMV have said in their report that they plan to better implement with time. Next study we have also has some history to it, and one that was actually directed in last year's budget. In 2020, DMV moved its headquarters from its Raleigh location on New Bern to Rocky Mount. And this kind of led to the General Assembly to ask DMV to consider whether mail routing has changed at DMV because of this move, whether there could be some additional changes to the way that they do mail, maybe just moving all mail operations to Rocky Mount instead of going back and forth between Raleigh and Rocky Mount, and then what the cost would be to implement some sort of changing to the way that the DMV does business for this. So first, we need to know the entities that are actually responsible for the way we route mail at the DMV, starting with the public partners that we have. First, and probably one of the most important ones, is the Mail Service Center. This is operated by the Department of Administration, and it's responsible for delivering mail between most state agencies and local governments. It does this through an interagency courier service. It has around 38,000 different mailboxes that it does this work through, and they charge for the cost of their operation to state agencies. DMV is actually the Mail Service Center's biggest customer. Next entity we have, and that we all know, is the United States Postal Service. They're responsible for most of the ingoing and outgoing mail that comes out of DMV, just like they would be for most businesses and most state agencies. And then we have Correction Enterprises, which we talked a little bit about previously, which is responsible for the biggest piece of mail that goes out in North Carolina for the DMV, which is license plates. On the private side, we have a few different partners, starting with the UPS, which handles the delivery of handicap placards, specialty plates, registration cards. Pitney Bowes, which is the pre-sorter for the state. They take a lot of the smaller pieces of mail that the state has. They take them to their Charlotte facility, they pre-sort them, and then mail them out from there. Then we have DataPack, which is responsible for the metering and the printing of mail stickers for the DMV. And they play a pretty important role in the way that DMV does its work now. And then we have the other services that are responsible for actually printing out documents. We've got Xerox, who used to run a print shop at the old DMV building. I'm not entirely sure if that's still the case because there have been some changes to mail routing since this study was done, and I'll discuss a little bit about that later. Then we have Canadian Banknote, which is the vendor for physical driver's licenses. They're responsible for printing and then for mailing those out to the millions of North Carolinians that have to have their driver's license. Outgoing mail from Raleigh. I've really tried to simplify this as much as possible. There are many different ways that mail gets in and out of DMV, so this is a fairly simplified version of it. If mail is going out from the Raleigh location at what used to be the print shop, it would either go to the Mail Service Center, which is located off Chappanoak in South Raleigh, and from there it would go to the United States Postal Service after some sorting and some prepackaging, or it would go to Pitney Bowes, which takes a lot of our smaller parcels and sorts them and gets them out to the Postal Service. As far as Rocky Mount mail, this is a bit more complicated and has many different routes depending on the type of mail that we're talking about. Like we said earlier, Anything that goes through UPS, such as specialty plates and registration cards, those just go directly to UPS and those get mailed out. If it's something that has to do for DMV business, or maybe the delivering of license plates, typically DMV has its own trucks that will do these routes, and some of that stuff will go to DMV offices or they'll go to LPAs. It just depends on the type of mail that we're actually talking about. And then the mail service center. They have a truck that goes from South Raleigh to Rocky Mount every day that picks up whatever mail is actually originating from the DMV headquarters and then handles the sorting and the preparing from there. So now that mail is routed between two different places, obviously the General Assembly wanted to know what that's done to DMV operations. And kind of the shorthand here is that it hasn't impacted operations that much. This is mostly because DMV is able to rely on the mail service center to do a lot of their bigger work, and then of course the vendors that the mail service center has. So they're able to kind of go from one location to another without taking too much time and without really impacting the work that DMV does. Now, the actual costs for mail, you can kind of see them in the right box there. They're, as you would expect, most of the mail costs that we have go to the Postal Service, which handles most packages, metering, which does a lot of the printing material that we need. Obviously, we have our driver's license vendor. This says Edemia because this was based on data from back when this study was done. We've since changed vendors, and so that's changed. I believe the costing is still about the same now. And then, of course, a lot of money goes to, or about $1 million goes to the mail service center, and then for its courier mail, they also receive a separate portion for that. Let's see. The last few recommendations that we have from the mail routing study is mostly that the DMV concluded that it would not be cost effective to change the way they already do business, which would be moving all mail from Rocky Mount. That really wouldn't be something that would be cheap. It would take a considerable amount of resources to actually build out a new mail facility, and that impact would also be on the United States Postal Service. There's a little bit of a description here on how much that actual cost would be at about $3 million for the first year, and of course there'd be some non-recurring and recurring costs from there. The biggest point here is that the way DMV would actually be able to save the most amount of money is consolidating with the mail service center, which I believe is actually in the process of doing. Last time I visited the mail service center, this was already something that was happening, and that would kind of reduce the amount of money that DMV would have to charge for doing mail in the future. And then, of course, if DMV was to stop utilizing the mail service center, that would impact other state agencies because DMV is the largest customer, so the price for delivering mail would be significantly increased for other state agencies in North Carolina. There is a lot. I think I can. There is one final study that we have from DMV. Sorry, there is a lot of reports that we're doing. Final report that was directed in the 2023 budget. This was actually conducted by the folks at North Carolina State's Institute for Transportation Research and Education, or ITRI. This was part of a larger modernization study that they did for the state government. I'm mostly going to focus on the work that they did on privatization. They looked at the DMV services that are currently privatized or outsourced to other places. They also did some state-by-state comparisons of privatization across the country, and they provided some recommendations for some possible future outsourcing of DMV work. To start, a lot of the work that DMV does is already outsourced to different partners. We have probably the biggest one being dealer or driver services, which is done by independent LPAs. And then we also have the printing of driver's licenses and the mailing of those that's done by our state vendor. Online processing is done through Pay It, and they've developed a portal for for DMV to do that work. You all heard from them earlier last week. And then, of course, one of the things that a lot of people have to interact with every single year when they do their registration is an independent vehicle repair shop. And a lot of that work is just private businesses that are doing it on behalf of the DMV. Other outsourced services, most of which we already discussed. We've got the license plate manufacturing, which is done by Correction Enterprises. Mail, that's done by the Mail Service Center. There's a little bit of back-end stuff that's done for dealer services and for driver knowledge tests. Much of what DMV does is already outsourced or privatized. 52% from the 2022-2023 budget was funding that was actually allocated to outside sources, not at the DMV, going to vendors and other state agencies for the work that they do. And most of that was, of course, in vehicle services and in online services from LPAs and Pay It. Now, as far as what other states do, most states actually run independent vendors that do some of the work. Some states do just DMV that does some of their work. For driver's license transactions, that's primarily DMV in North Carolina. A lot of other states like Arizona use local contractors. Kansas and many states use AAA Car Club for a lot of this work. And they've had success with doing that model, or they have a smaller vendor that does this work. Vehicle titling. There are a lot of different entities that do this in North Carolina. It's mostly the LPAs, but most states actually rely on local contractors like we do, the example being Alaska and Arizona. For knowledge tests, and road tests, this is something that North Carolina does at DMVs. This is the case for some states that still do this. There are also some states that rely on local contractors or some bigger contractors or universities to do this work for them. As far as recommendations from this study, as we said, a lot of DMV operation is already outsourced, so the question is really what else is there to do? Probably the easiest things to start with is just mail distribution, which is already primarily outsourced, but there's still some transportation that's done by DMV themselves, usually delivering bigger packages between their offices or between LPAs. If the General Assembly would like to consider doing further privatization, really the next biggest piece is driver services, which is when you go, you verify your documents, and you kind of apply for your ID. Many states have had luck with this. There are some states that have not had the same success, New Jersey being the example from the study, who in the 90s privatized and then had to reabsorb all the entities that were privatized because of some public outcry and some kind of political haranguing about the way that was implemented. The folks at ITRI really stressed that if the General Assembly wants to seek privatization of driver services, there are a lot of considerations and further study that needs to be done, mostly on the personal security aspect and the oversight that's needed, but a little bit in whether customer service would actually be improved with further privatization, and then really focused on the fact that a lot of IT modernization would still have to occur at DMV before this is implemented further. Next, we have the Ferry Division studies, which, am I good to?
Yeah, we're just trying to make sure we get through to questions. You get like 10 minutes.
We are almost done, at least for me. I'll be going over the two studies from the Ferry Division, which is the replacement study and the maintenance capacity study. The ferry replacement